Hello. Good morning. I'm a minute or two late. Sometimes it doesn't establish a connection right away. But anyway, let me get started by saying good morning in the chat. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. And yes, so welcome. My name is Heather, and I am the owner of Ewe Ewe Yarns, this yarn company, and this is my knitting community called Club Ewe Ewe. Um, Here we like to come in and chat about all things knitting and yarn. This is my, I think, fifth live stream blog now. So we've talked about um, why all of the UU yarns are made from merino wool, and we've talked about some different projects. I showed a trunk show that was going to a new store. Last week we talked about the Heather's yarns, which that was a lot of fun. There's a nice blog post with a ton of different Heather project ideas, and yeah, I think we're gonna send out, I think I'll do a newsletter maybe tomorrow that says, I think we're entering Heather weather, like sweater weather, but I think we're gonna do Heather weather. So anyway, I am, I thought today we could talk about the, like how we got into knitting. So if you wanna drop a note in the chat and say good morning or good afternoon, and maybe let me know where you're from, say hi, and so I know I'm not just hanging out here. I live in Oceanside, California, which is near San Diego, so kind of the lower left side of California in the country, and it's kind of overcast here today, but that's all right. It's about 75, not too bad. So I thought we could have a little chat about how I got into knitting, and how that led me to start a whole yarn company with a rainbow of yarns. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I don't know if anybody knows. I relocated to California when I was about 23, 24 years old. But I grew up on the eastern side of Pennsylvania near Allentown and had a life full of doing craft projects for my whole childhood. I started sewing really young, and let's see what else. I did woodworking with my dad, and we did stained glass, just any craft project. I think I've quilling, quilting. It's hard for me to come up with a craft project that I haven't tried at least once in my life. But one thing I was never exposed to really was knitting. My mom didn't really knit when I was a kid, and my grandma did, but she lived all the way in Ohio. So I never really saw anybody doing knitting. And it wasn't until one of my sisters took it up um, when she was in her 20s. She started crocheting and knitting like a madwoman. And then she had a daughter and started her own knitting pattern business. And I was in school for graphic design, and I helped do her logo and helped her build her website and all sorts of stuff like that back in the early 2000s. I mean, maybe even the year 2000. And we did we did a stitches show in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania in 2000. And that was kind of my first introduction to the knitters. And we made kits with yarn, and it was a lot of fun. And, but I still had never learned how to knit or anything like that or crochet. And then she decided that uh, where she was going to open a yarn store. So it outside the Philadelphia, like in the greater Philadelphia area. So she opened a yarn store. And one Saturday afternoon, I was like in college still, and I went out to her store and I was just looking around to see it for the first time. And she's like, I couldn't get over it. I was like, all the colors. I just walked around the store squeezing all the yarn. And I remember seeing this huge hank of like electric green, bulky, like super bulky yarn. And I was like, what is this stuff? And she saw me over there in the corner, like looking at all these yarns, and was like, that's it. Sit down. Sit down. I'm teaching you how to knit. I'm like, I do not need another hobby. Like, I'm in fine art school. I don't need a craft hobby. She's like, no, I disagree. I think you're gonna like it. So she sits me down and teaches me how to knit right there on a Saturday. And I took to it, and that was in the era we were doing felted handbags. Has anybody done any do you remember the felted handbag craze? Did you knit any of those? you can you can leave me a comment. I knit so many felted handbags. I still have a bunch of them because I still like them even though they're not like super popular these days. I just can't I can't part with them. Um so anyway, my first attempt was a hat, and that hat was, oh no, excuse me. I knit a scarf, and there's a couple inches that I knit at the store that were okay, and then when I got on my own, I started twisting my stitches. And then I learned how to cast on in the round, and I knit a beanie, and it's this black beanie. I still have it. it it's so tight. You can't even give it a stretch because, like I said, I was twisting my stitches. I was going in, wrapping the yarn backwards. So it has no flex and no give. And then I started making those felted purses, and I made probably 20 felted purses. The little ones, they were like this big. And because those were really fun, and any mistakes you'd make kind of disappeared. So I made pink ones with eyelash and all sorts of fun stuff. And then I moved to California right around that time. I had graduated from college, and um, my husband got a job out here. So we moved to California. And then about a year after we had moved here, my sister came out to visit, and she said, what if we open a sister store, like a sister yarn store? And I was like, oh, well, that sounds exciting. What could we do? So, but I still didn't really know how to knit anything other than felted handbags or anything like that. So here we go. I'm like, all right, let's open a yarn store. So since she was so well versed in yarn, she did all the buying and figured it out. And then we were shipping to both stores. And so we had bi-coastal yarn stores. And my journey, like I had worked in retail and design. So I started I started a yarn store without much knitting experience. And in some ways that's really good because I had no expectations of what other knitters should be doing or anything like that. But then at the same time, I didn't really know how to help knitters all that well. And I didn't understand that people were going to come in with their projects and ask for help. Excuse me. So people would come in and, they'd have a sweater they've been working on, maybe even from another yarn store. Oh, good morning, Michelle. Oh, we're having sound trouble. Oh, thank you for letting me know. Let me see here. So can you not hear me? I guess if you can't hear me, then that wouldn't. Oh, okay, good. Thank you, Lenore. I appreciate you letting me know. That's why I like people to leave me a comment so I can find out if everything's okay. It's like, it's just me here. So yeah, well, I hope you get your sound worked out. Anyway, so knitters will come into the store with maybe a project they had bought somewhere else since I was new and things like that. And they'd say, what's wrong with this? Like, is it something I did? Is the pattern wrong? How do I do this stitch? And this was in the days like, 2004. Like, YouTube didn't exist, Ravelry didn't exist. Uh, so I just have to look at the project and try and figure it out. And thankfully, early on, I met two very nice knitting teachers. One I am still um, very good friends with. She's become like an extended family member at this point, and she would show me things like, so if she happened to be in the store when a customer was there, she'd kind of leap in over my shoulder and say, oh well, if you maybe do this and try this. And I learned very quick how to do some off the cuff problem solving with knitting, and um, it really advanced my knitting skills by helping understand how patterns come together kind of in an instant, because I'd have a customer sitting right next to me asking for help. So I'd have to say, okay, like focus and figure this out. So the that's how I kind of got good at knitting, was by helping people. And so it really led me to understand the value of like community within knitting, because you need to be able to, there's just something to like seeing something happen, which is why that's why kind of why still why I started this community a couple months ago, because it's like you get inspiration from seeing other knitters projects, or you gain a quick tip that you maybe wouldn't have seen. And now that the fact that we have almost 1,000 people in this community, we can we can see all sorts of different like ways of doing things. And I think as it builds and as it grows, we'll really develop this as a good resource. The club UU itself as a resource where people can ask questions, and other experienced knitters can jump in and help, or I can help, whichever way it goes. Because like I said, I learned a lot from other knitters. That's how I learned it, all the same. So yeah, I had my yarn store here in Oceanside, California for about 3 years. And I'll tell you, having a local business makes you an instant townie. So I became, you know, just, I was always like knitting and doing stuff. And uh, then right around like 2000, that I decided to close my store. And then at the same time, weirdly, my sister that had the store too, uh, her husband got a job in Northern California. And so they said, oh, well, we're going to actually close our store too and move out to California. So they put everything online, and I closed my store, and we sort of um, stopped working together. Not in a bad way, just, sort of stopped. And after that, it was kind of like I realized I had a strong passion for knitting. So I kept going to a knitting group that knitting teacher that I told you about earlier, Marcia, had she had a local knitting group. So I was going to that. So I'd still knit, and I was dabbling in doing some pattern design. And then I went back to doing graphic design full time. Uh, and then sort of I was looking around, kind of trying to figure out what kind of brand I'd like to start. I did logos and branding and websites for small companies as a graphic designer, and I thought, I should uh, I should start a brand of my own, but I didn't really know what it was going to be. Like, so then all of a sudden, uh, somebody said, "Well, why don't you start a yarn line?" And I was like, I could totally start a yarn line. I knew people, I knew mills from when we had the store. I had been to trade shows, I had been on the buying end, but I had done sales trade shows with my father all growing up. So I knew how to host a booth in a trade show and everything like that. So, and I knew the sales channels, I knew what sales reps were, I knew both sides of the business. So I thought, okay. So I called up a friend we had from a mill and said, "Hey, can you make me some samples?" And they said, "Sure, totally." So I said, "I think I'd like to start with a worsted weight merino. You might recognize it." Because worsted weight yarn is my favorite weight to knit with. I like knitting on sort of like size 8, 9 needle. I find it to be the most comfortable for my hands. So I thought, might as well start with what I like best. And it is the most popular size anyway, as far as patterns and everything. At least it was 12 years ago. And so I had some samples made of woolly worsted, and then I picked some colors and ordered my first set of yarn. And it was only 7 of these colors of worsted weight yarn. And that was 11 and a half years ago now. And now Ewe Yarns has grown to, we went from just 7 SKUs. Now we have 100, believe it or not, because we have 18 colors of fingering weight, 25 colors of sport weight, 25 colors of worsted weight, 10 colors of heathers, and 22 colors of bulky weight. And that somehow I have 100 stock keeping units now. And so that's why, sometimes like if I'm out of sport weight in vanilla, like there's a lot of like in and out to manage. So, but anyway, if I am out of anything, it is on its way coming from Italy. It's just a very crazy time for international shipping these days. So if you're waiting on something, I assure you it's on its way. So that's kind of how I ended up in the knitting world. And I know there's a question here in the community. I'll post a link to it down below that asks who taught you how to knit. And it's one of my favorites to read because there's so many great stories. One woman's father taught her. I don't know. There's just so many good stories. A lot of like aunts and grandmas, neighbors, a lot of good neighbor stories in that thread. So I just find it, I don't know, so relaxing to sit and read that thread that I thought, maybe you'd like to hear sort of my knitting origin story. So now I always make the joke that my sister got me into this and I blame her. uh, since, the yarn has kind of taken over portions of my house like this, my studio. But that's okay because I do really love it. So that is how I got into yarn, and I want this yarn to inspire you. I think about the colors like I think about kind of colored pencils. So I have uh you know, I plan out the colors so they all work together. So it's almost like if you open a fresh box of like Crayola crayons or Prismacolor colored pencils, and you can sit and pick one and blend and mix and match to make the whole thing your own. And that's how I think about the yarn and the colors and the mixing for you. Like, you can pick up a bright pink and it's going to match with the green, which is going to match with the other green. And you can just make a project that suits you, or maybe you know, like pink and blue, and those are going to work together too. So I really try and think of it as a whole color story and family. That's kind of where my graphic design applies to the yarn. And yeah, I hope that, if you have a color project or you like working with color, that you'll be able to come to the yarn and say, oh, okay, yeah, I need some grays. And what would make those grays pop? Oh, I like that teal color. And you can feel confident that it's going to work together. Oh, thanks, Alyssa. That's nice of you to say. Alyssa said it's gorgeous. That warms my heart. Oh, let's see. What do I got on here? Pink, dark red. So let's see. Kind of, I don't quite have a hot pink like that. Pink, dark red, and maybe some chocolate. There you go. There you are. And let's throw this one in for good measure. It's my kind of outfit. So if you have any questions, you can leave me a comment in this thread. I'll save this video and we can talk more about yarn or how you got into knitting. Like I said, I love hearing people's stories, and I'll leave a comment to that other thread because it is just really nice to sit and read about knitters and ask questions. Think about how you learned how to knit and why you came to this hobby and why you love it. So that is just a little bit about me and how I came to yarn and knitting. So let's see what's going on for the week. It's Wednesday. I met a dog who I'm considering. We met it. We kind of maybe looking for a second dog. So adopting a rescue. And so we'll see. We need to introduce her to our dog and that type of thing. So not sure how that's going to go. I know we have some other rescue friends here in the community. And so any tips or anything about adding a new rescue dog into your house? I have one shepherd. She's passed out here on my floor. You may have heard. You have 4 rescue dogs, Mary. Wow, Mary Catherine. Michelle, just gotten back into knitting after years. Lots has changed. A lot has changed after 20 years. Yes, that's kind of like when I learned. What is the difference between sport and DK? That is a great question. And it's great that you asked that because I was just explaining to someone. I was explaining to another knitting designer. She was annoyed that someone assumed they could take DK weight yarn and knit it in a sport weight pattern. And I said to her, it's kind of common because 15 years ago, it was just one category. We had fingering weight, sport DK, worsted, bulky, chunky, bulky, super bulky. And she was like, what do you mean? I said, yeah, sport and DK were always kind of grouped together. But really, if you think about it, well, not if you think about it, really what the meaning is it goes fingering weight is like the thinnest, lace is the thinnest, and then fingering weight. And then sport comes after fingering. So fingering weight is about 7 stitches to the inch. Sport weight is about 6. DK is like 5.5. And then worsted is like 5 to the inch. And then you start getting into Aran. So there's worsted and Aran weight. Those kind of divide. And Aran is kind of more like 4.5 to 4 stitches per inch. So you can hear these stitches are getting wider as we go. We started at 7 stitches that you were packing into an inch. Sport falls about 6. DK falls about 5.5. Worsted is 5 to 4.5. Aran is 4. Chunky is 3.5. Now you're getting up to like size 10.5, 11 needle. And then you start getting up into the bigger stuff like bulky and super bulky, where you're getting like maybe 2.5, 2 stitches to the inch. So it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we head up the spectrum. So sport is a little thinner than DK, and they're not necessarily interchangeable. You can sometimes use my sport weight for a DK pattern because my yarn is so bouncy, and when you block it, it kind of blooms and it can fill in, or it can take a DK pattern and make it drapier while still having good texture to it. So you can exchange DK and sport if it's the right yarn, but it's probably best. There's so many good DK patterns now and sport patterns that it's probably best to try and work them as close to the recommended gauge as possible, because it just gives you less headache trying to figure things out. So, oh, Alyssa's gonna try her first sweater. Oh, good. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, let us know if you have any questions. Hi, Kat. Nice to see you. Yeah, leave me a note if you have any other questions. I'm here for a little while. I'm happy to answer stuff. We can talk about color. I thought that was a good sport DK question. Clarification. Another reason to knit a gauge swatch. Yes, gauge swatches are important. I know they're boring, but it's like 1 hour of your life. And it's, it makes so much difference to sort of figure that out and know what how your sweater could turn out. Because you spend a lot of money on yarn. And it's a great idea to be able to, well, it's a great reassurance to be able to understand how your sweater, how your sweater will look or even trying a stitch and seeing how that stitch is going to look in that yarn. Like, I'm kind of spoiled. I really only knit with my yarn these days because it's the most practical thing for my time. So I know what my tension is on each of my yarns on a bunch of different needle sizes. But let that be noted that if I'm trying a different stitch, I do make a swatch because I'm like, well, how's that stitch going to look in my yarn? Or how is it going to block out? Is it not going to block very well? So yeah, making a gauge swatch is a good idea. And like I said, it really doesn't take that much time. And it just gives you so much kind of reassurance and insurance in how the finished project is probably going to look. But that is the other thing with doing hobbies. Like I said, I learned how to sew, and it's like, well, sometimes you'd sew something and it wasn't quite right. And hopefully you made an error that was like a little too big so you could take it in or adjust it or give it a tuck or something like that. But if you made an adjustment that was a little too small and you've cut it already, you're really having a bad day, because then if you don't have any more fabric, or there's a lot of different things. So as far as knitting goes, it's forgiving, because if it's not working, you can just rip it out and try again, which is nice. So yeah, if anybody has any other questions, feel free. Otherwise, yeah, if you have any advice for bringing a new dog in, I like those. And we don't have a dog yet, just to clarify, but it's one of those. We've had some conversations, so you never know. It's hard to say no to a rescue dog, isn't it? Obviously, if we have people with 4 dogs, they feel me. So anyway, happy Wednesday. That is what's happening here at UU this week. I think we're going to, like I said, I'm going to start. We're going to talk about more of those Heather's projects, and I have the cutest graphic that says Heather weather instead of sweater weather. So we'll talk about all the Heather yarns for the next couple of days in the newsletters. So if you have any questions, you can leave me a comment. I'm going to put this video up in a post. You can always put a comment in there, or you can email us directly from the website. We try to get back to every email we get. So yeah, just let us know. We're here. And if you have any questions about color or gauge swatching or what's the difference between yarn weights, I love those types of questions, obviously. And yeah, I'm happy to help. So I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you, let's say 10:30 again next Wednesday. This was the 5th week I've done one, so this time seems to be working for me. And